Welcome to the DX Today podcast, where you get facts and no hype. I'm Ryan, and joining me today is Chloe.
Thanks, Ryan. Today, we're diving into a topic that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi thriller, but it is very much a reality in today's financial markets. We're talking about algorithmic cartels.
It's a term that's been gaining traction in academic circles, specifically following a groundbreaking research paper by professors Itai Goldstein and Winston Wei Dao from the Wharton School, along with Yan Ji from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. The title of their work is AI-Powered Trading, Algorithmic Collusion, and Price Efficiency.
And Ryan, the findings are, well, they're unsettling. We're not talking about humans sitting in a dark room plotting to fix prices. We're talking about AI agents, trading bots, that are learning to collude with each other spontaneously without any human instruction.
Exactly. And they do it through something the researchers call artificial stupidity. But before we get into the stupidity part, which is actually quite brilliant in a dark way, we need to look at the history here. How did we get to a point where software is acting like a mafia don?
Right, because historically, if you wanted to rig a market, you had to have a paper trail, right? You needed emails, phone calls, or secret meetings.
Precisely. Think back to the LIBOR scandal or the foreign exchange rigging cases of the early 2010s. The Department of Justice and the SEC caught those guys because there was evidence of communication. Under Section 1 of the Sherman Act, you need to prove there was an agreement to collude. If two competitors meet in a basement and agree to keep prices high, that's a crime.
But the transition to algorithmic trading was supposed to fix that. The narrative for 20 years was that algorithms would make markets perfect. They would remove human greed, eliminate emotional errors, and respond to data in milliseconds.
That was the theory. And for a while, it seemed to work. Simple rule-based algorithms did increase efficiency. But then we moved into the era of reinforcement learning, or RL. This is where the AI isn't given a set of rules, it's given a goal, usually maximize profit, and it learns through trial and error how to achieve it.
And this is where the Wharton study comes in. They ran simulations using these reinforcement learning agents, specifically something called Q-learning agents, to see how they would behave in a competitive market.
And they didn't behave, at least not in the way free market economists expected. They didn't compete to drive prices down for the consumer. Instead, they converged on what the researchers call supra-competitive profits.
Supra-competitive. That's a fancy way of saying they're making way more money than they should be in a fair competitive market.
Precisely. And they found two specific mechanisms that allow this to happen. The first one is the price trigger strategy. Chloe, walk us through how a bot punishes another bot.
It's actually fascinating. So imagine two AI bots are trading. Bot A decides to lower its price slightly to grab more market share. In a normal world, that's competition. But bot B is an AI that has learned through thousands of simulations that if it lets bot A get away with that, its own long-term profits will drop. So the moment bot A lowers the price, bot B responds by crashing the price even further. It's a price war meant to punish the defector.
It's the scorched earth policy.
Exactly. The bots quickly learn that if they try to compete on price, they both lose money because of these aggressive punishments. So they reach a silent, unspoken realization. If I keep my price high and you keep your price high, we both stay rich. No one ever sent an email. No one ever agreed to anything. They just optimized for the best outcome.
That brings us to this second mechanism, which I find even more fascinating because of the name, artificial stupidity.
It sounds like a contradiction. How can an AI be stupid to make more money?
It's about over-pruned biases. In neural networks, pruning is when you remove connections that aren't useful. The Wharton researchers found that after these AI agents experience the pain of a price war, those punishments we just talked about, their neural networks actually pruned away aggressive or competitive strategies.
Wait, so they essentially lobotomize themselves?
In a sense, yes. They become stupid by ignoring potentially profitable opportunities to underprice their competitors. They settle into a very rigid, non-competitive pattern. Because every bot in the environment adopts the same stupid caution, they inadvertently form a cartel. They're too afraid to compete, so they just don't. And the result is a market that looks stable on the surface, but is actually rigged by collective inaction. That is wild. And the data from the Wharton HKUST simulation really backs this up. They found that these colluding bots weren't just a fluke of a clean laboratory environment. They tested this in noisy markets with high volatility.
Right.
And you'd think that noise would disrupt the coordination. If the market is chaotic, how can the bots tell the difference between a random price drop and a competitor trying to cheat the cartel?
Exactly. But the study found that even in those noisy environments, the bots were robust. They eventually identified the patterns and maintained the collusion. And here's the kicker. The collusion was even stronger when the bots were trained on similar datasets.
Which is a massive problem, because in the real world, most of these hedge funds and trading firms are buying their data from the same 3 or 4 giant providers. If you're all feeding your AI the same food, they're going to grow up thinking the same way.
Let's talk about the impact on the average person. If these bots are refusing to trade aggressively on new information because they're afraid of triggering a price war, what happens to the market?
Liquidity dries up. That's one of the key findings. In scenarios where bots colluded, market liquidity dropped significantly. And for a retail investor or a pension fund, low liquidity means higher costs to trade. It's essentially a hidden tax on the entire economy. Every time you buy a stock or a mutual fund, you're potentially paying a premium to an algorithmic cartel that has decided not to compete.
And this isn't just a theoretical worry for the future. We're seeing major players, BlackRock, JP Morgan, Renaissance Technologies, deploying increasingly agentic AI. We're moving away from if-then code to black box models, where even the programmers don't fully understand why the AI made a specific trade.
That brings us to the intent gap. And this is where my no-nonsense side gets really worried. Chloe, if a regulator from the SEC walks into a hedge fund and says, your AI is price fixing, what's the fund's defense?
They just say, we didn't tell it to do that. And legally, they're right. Under current law, specifically the Sherman Act I mentioned earlier, you need intent. You need a meeting of the minds. But an AI doesn't have a mind in the legal sense. It has a reward function. If the reward function leads to collusion, but no human told it to collude, is it a crime? Currently, no. It's a legal gray area that's more like a black hole. The Wharton study highlights that traditional antitrust enforcement is basically toothless here. You can't subpoena an algorithm's thoughts if there was never a conscious decision to break the law. So if the law is toothless, what are the researchers suggesting? Because we can't just let the global economy be run by stupid, colluding bots.
The recommendations are actually quite bold. First, they're calling for algorithmic diversification. Basically, if you're a massive firm, you shouldn't be allowed to have all your bots trained on the same data or using the same architecture. We need genetic diversity in our algorithms to prevent them from converging on the same collusive strategies.
That makes sense. It's like avoiding a monoculture in farming. But how do you enforce that?
That's the hard part. Another suggestion is outcome-based regulation. Instead of trying to prove how the bots colluded, which is nearly impossible with a black box, the regulators should look at the what. If the market outcomes consistently deviate from what a competitive model predicts, the firm should be held liable regardless of intent.
I can already hear the lobbyists screaming about that one. You're punishing us for being too efficient.
Exactly. But the Wharton findings suggest that this isn't efficiency, it's the opposite. It's a degradation of price formation. The third big recommendation is the use of regulatory sandboxes. Before a firm can deploy a massive market-moving AI agent, they should have to prove in a controlled, simulated environment that their bot isn't going to spontaneously start joining a cartel.
It's like a stress test for banks, but for algorithms.
Precisely. And the researchers also suggested that regulators like the SEC need to fight fire with fire. They need to develop their own AI versus AI tools. We need policeman bots that can detect the subtle signaling patterns of a price trigger strategy in real time.
It's a bit of an arms race, isn't it?
It is. And as of late 2025, we are at a major crossroads. The OECD and the FTC have issued warnings, but the Wharton study is the first one that really puts the hard data on the table. It shows that this isn't just a could-happen scenario. In a reinforcement learning environment, collusion is often the optimal path. It is the natural resting state for a profit-maximizing AI. That's the part that sticks with me. We think of cartels as these evil, deliberate conspiracies, but in the world of AI, a cartel is just the most efficient way to get a high score. Right. The AI isn't evil. It doesn't want to hurt the retail investor. It doesn't even know the retail investor exists. It just knows that if it lowers its price, its punishment meter goes up. And if it keeps its price high, its reward meter goes up. It's a very simple, very cold logic.
So, Ryan, let's wrap this up. If you're a listener who has a 401k or a brokerage account, what's the takeaway here? Is it time to panic?
Not panic, but awareness. We are moving into a market structure that is increasingly opaque. The efficient market hypothesis, the idea that all information is perfectly reflected in prices, is being challenged by this artificial stupidity. If bots are refusing to act on information to keep the peace with other bots, the prices we see on our screens might not be true prices.
It's a fascinating, if slightly terrifying look at the unintended consequences of the AI boom.
It really is. We've spent so much time worrying about AI becoming too smart and taking over the world. Maybe we should have been worrying about it becoming too stupid and fixing the markets.
Well said. This Wharton research is definitely a wake-up call for the industry and regulators alike.
We'll be keeping a close eye on how the SEC and other global bodies respond to these findings in the coming months. But for now, that's the deep dive into the algorithmic cartel.
Thanks for joining us for this breakdown. If you want to read the full Wharton HQST paper, we'll have the references in the show notes.
This has been the DX Today podcast. No hype, just the facts. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Chloe. We'll see you in the next episode.
Goodbye.